everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to discuss about the Delhi Sultans, a chapter from class 7 NCERT textbook, Our Past Part 2. Before we begin, let's have a look at this chart and get familiar with some dynasties and their rulers who ruled in Delhi. Let's begin with Delhi as the capital. Delhi first became the capital of a kingdom under the Tomar Rajputs and then under the Chauhans or Chahamanas of Ajmer in the middle of the 12th century. Under the Tomars and Chauhans, Delhi became an important commercial center. Very soon, with the beginning of 13th century, Delhi became a more significant capital that controlled vast areas of the subcontinent. It all happened with the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate. Let's have a quick look at the establishment of Delhi Sultanate.
The establishment of Delhi Sultanate is associated with the first and the second Battle of Tarain, which took place in the year 1191 and 1192. Both the battles took place between Prithviraj Chauhan of Chauhan dynasty in India and Muhammad Ghori, the Sultan of Ghurid dynasty in Afghanistan. In the first battle, Prithviraj Chauhan defeated Muhammad Ghori, but in the second battle, Prithviraj Chauhan got defeated. And this defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan opened the Indian territory to be conquered by the Turkish rulers. Thus, the second battle of Tarain marked the establishment of Turkish rule or Islamic rule in India. But we need to remember that after winning the second battle of Tarain, Muhammad Ghori did not stay in India and went back to his own empire. For Indian territories, Muhammad Ghori gave the responsibility to his trusted slave Qutbuddin Aibak. And this slave, Aibak, established slave dynasty in India.
The Delhi Sultans built many cities like Siri, Firozabad, Tughlaqabad, Hauz Khas, etc. in the area that we now know as Delhi. Have a look at this map. Now the question is, how do we know the history of Delhi that goes back to more than 800 years if we begin with Delhi Sultanate? The answer is inscriptions, coins and architecture. At the same time, we cannot forget to mention the Tawarik or the histories which were written by learned men like secretaries, administrators, poets and courtiers who both recounted events and advised rulers on governance. These Tawariks were written in Persian, the language of administration under the Delhi Sultans. Here we need to remember that these historical texts like Tawariks need to be used carefully and may not give us the clear picture of the society and the rulers of the Delhi Sultanate. But why? There are some reasons. Firstly, the authors of Tawarik lived in cities, mainly Delhi, and hardly ever in villages. So, the clear picture of peasants and artisans who lived in the villages may be missing. Secondly, they often wrote their histories for sultans in the hope of rich rewards. So, they ended up writing only the good things about the rulers and omitted the mistakes and defeats. Thirdly, these authors advised rulers on the need to preserve an ideal social order based on birthright and gender distinctions. Their ideas were not shared by everybody. So, maybe these Tawariks present a biased opinion. With this third point on gender distinction, let's have a look at the story of Razia. In 1236, Sultan Iltutmish's daughter Razia became Sultan. The chronicler of the age, Minhaj-e-Siraj, recognized that she was more able and qualified than all her brothers. But he was not comfortable at having a queen or a female as ruler. Nor were the nobles happy at her attempts to rule independently. She was removed from the throne in 1240. Minhaj-e-Siraj thought that the queen's rule went against the ideal social order created by God, in which women were supposed to be subordinate to men. Now let's talk about the expansion of Delhi Sultanate. Initially, the Delhi Sultans focused on the safe fortified towns occupied with garrisons of soldiers. They hardly controlled the villages or hinterland. For their basic supplies of food and resources, they were dependent upon trade, tribute, or plunder. The expansion of a sultanate wasn't very easy. Controlling distant regions like Bengal and Sindh from Delhi was extremely difficult. Rebellion, war, even bad weather could snap fragile communication routes. Delhi authority was also challenged by Mongol invasions from Afghanistan and by governors who rebelled at any sign of the Sultan's weakness. Dealing with all these challenges, the consolidation of Delhi Sultanate occurred during the reign of Ghiyasuddin Balban and further significant expansion under Alauddin Khalji and Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Let's move on to understand what were the strategies of Delhi Sultans. How did they expand the empire? Their campaigns for expansion may be categorized broadly as campaigns along the internal frontier of the Sultanate and campaigns along the external frontier of the Sultanate. Their first set of campaigns ran along the internal frontier of the Sultanate, which aimed at consolidating the hinterlands of the garrison towns. During these campaigns, forests were cleared in the Ganga Yamuna Doab and hunter gatherers and pastoralists expelled from their habitat. It means the village and the countryside regions were made part of the Sultanate. These lands were given to peasants and agriculture was encouraged. More production meant regular revenue and supplies for the Sultan or the Sultanate. Simultaneously, new fortresses, garrison towns, and towns were established to protect trade routes and to promote regional trade. The second expansion occurred along the external frontier of the Sultanate. With this, the far off regions were made part of the Sultanate. Military expeditions into southern India started during the reign of Alauddin Khalji and culminated with Muhammad bin Tughlaq. In their campaigns, Sultanate armies captured elephants, horses, and slaves and carried away precious metals. You may have a look at this map. It is important to remember that large parts of the subcontinent remained outside the control of the Delhi Sultans. It was difficult to control distant provinces like Bengal from Delhi. Even in the Gangetic Plain, there were forested areas that Sultanate forces could not penetrate. Local chieftains established their rule in these regions. Sometimes, rulers like Alauddin Khalji and Muhammad bin Tughlaq could force their control in these areas but only for a short duration. But we cannot forget the fact that in almost 150 years, that is, by the end of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's reign, the armies of Delhi Sultanate had marched across a large part of the subcontinent. They had defeated rival armies and seized cities. The Sultanate collected taxes from the peasantry and dispensed justice in its realm. But how complete and effective was its administration to control such a vast territory? It must not be very easy. The consolidation of a kingdom as vast as the Delhi Sultanate needed some very trustworthy or loyal people to take care of the administration. They needed reliable governors and administrators. For this, rather than appointing nobles or aristocrats and landlords as governors, the early Delhi sultans, especially Iltutmish, preferred their special slaves called bandagans to hold important posts. They were carefully trained to man some of the most important political offices in the kingdom. Since they were totally dependent upon their master, the Sultan could trust and rely upon them. It is interesting to mention that Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq appointed people who were wine distiller, barber, cook, gardeners to high administrative posts. But Ziauddin Barani, a mid 14th century chronicler, reported their appointments as a sign of the Sultan's loss of political judgment and his incapacity to rule. Another significant part to mention about the administration under the Delhi Sultans is Iqta system. Let's have a look.
Iqta system was a land-based administrative system introduced in India by Iltutmish of slave dynasty. And then the system was followed by other sultans of Delhi. Delhi sultans had divided their empire into several iqtas or land and put them under the charge of officers called iqtadars. These iqtadars were generally the members of the royal family or a notable amir or noble. The iqtas were the administrative units given to officers in lieu of their services to the sultan. Iqtadars maintained large armies and was required to send the same when asked by the sultan. Iqtadars maintained law and order in the territory or iqta under his charge and protected the life and property of the people. To provide all these services to sultan and take administrative tasks or responsibilities, iqtadars collected revenue from these iqtas. From the revenue thus collected, he administered expenditure on the maintenance of his army, his pay, and other administrative expenditure and deposited the rest in the state treasury. But there were some restrictions on iqtadars. The iqtadar did not always enjoy hereditary power, that is, the iqta could not be transferred from father to son. The sultan could take back iqta from him whenever he pleased. This way, iqtadars could not become powerful in their iqtas. The iqtadars were liable to be transferred from one iqta to another, ensuring that they did not become powerful in a particular iqta. Besides, for any major administrative decision or military movement or territorial expansion, iqtadars had to take permission from the sultan. So, iqtadars were basically administrative officials in iqtas. But at the same time, we need to remember that the rules and restrictions on iqtadars were strictly enforced only by the strong rulers. In case of weak rulers, iqtadars could keep a strong hold on their iqtas. Like, the later rulers of Delhi Sultanate were too weak to keep a check on the growing power of iqtadars, who started ruling their iqtas independently.
Let's quickly summarize. Delhi Sultans, especially the Khaljis and Tughlaq monarchs, appointed military commanders as governors of territories of varying sizes. These lands were called iqta and their holders were called iqtadars or mukti. The duty of the muktis was to lead military campaigns and maintain law and order in their iqtas. In exchange for their military services, the muktis collected the revenues of their assignments as salary. They also paid their soldiers from these revenues. To control their power, the office of these iqtadars or muktis was not inheritable and they were assigned iqtas for a short duration or short period of time. These harsh conditions of service were rigorously imposed during the reigns of Alauddin Khalji and Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Besides, accountants were appointed by the state to check the amount of revenue collected by the muktis. Care was taken that the mukti collected only the taxes prescribed by the state and that he kept the required number of soldiers. Like iqtadars, the Delhi Sultans controlled even the Samantas. Let's know about them too. As the Delhi Sultans brought the hinterland of the cities or the countryside or nearby villages under their control, they forced the landed chieftains, the Samanta aristocrats, and rich landlords to accept their authority. Under Alauddin Khilji, the state brought the assessment and collection of land revenue under their own control. The rights of the local chieftains to levy taxes were cancelled and they were also forced to pay taxes. The Sultan's administrators measured the land and kept careful accounts. Some of the old chieftains and landlords served the Sultanate as revenue collectors and assessors. There were three types of taxes. Firstly, on cultivation, which was called kharaj, amounting to about 50% of the peasants' produce. Secondly, on cattle, and thirdly, on houses. Moving on to another big challenge for Delhi Sultans, Genghis Khan, a name which is quite familiar to a lot of people. He was a Mongol who invaded Transoxiana in northeast Iran in 1219, and the Delhi Sultanate faced their onslaught soon after. You may have a look at the location of Transoxiana. You may also see India here. So Transoxiana is in the northwest side of India. Mongol attacks on the Delhi Sultanate increased during the reign of Alauddin Khilji and in the early years of Muhammad Tughlaq's rule. This forced the two rulers to mobilize a large standing army or permanent army in Delhi, which posed a huge administrative challenge. Let us see how the two sultans dealt with this. Let's see some significant administrative decisions of Alauddin Khilji. During his reign, Delhi was attacked by Mongols twice in 1299, 1300 and again in 1302 to 1303. As a defensive measure, Alauddin Khilji raised a large standing army. Alauddin constructed a new garrison town named Siri for his soldiers. The soldiers needed food and salary, so tax was one of the solutions. This was done through the produce collected as tax from lands between the Ganga and Yamuna, which was very fertile region for agricultural produce. Tax was fixed at 50% of the peasants' produce. Also, the soldiers had to be paid. Alauddin chose to pay his soldiers salaries in cash rather than iktas or piece of land. Their cash salary was not very high. Rather, Alauddin controlled the prices of goods that soldiers would buy from their salary. So, when market price of goods is cheap, the soldiers had to give less money to buy the goods of their needs. It means soldiers will be fine even with the low salary. Alauddin controlled the prices of goods in Delhi. Prices were carefully surveyed by officers and merchants who did not sell at the prescribed rates were punished. Alauddin's administrative measures were quite successful and chroniclers praised his reign for its cheap prices and efficient supplies of goods in the market. He successfully withstood the threat of Mongol invasions. On the other hand, Muhammad bin Tughlaq was attacked by Mongols in the early years of his reign. The Mongol army was defeated. Muhammad Tughlaq was confident about the strength of his army and resources to plan an attack on Transoxiana, which was far and not very easy to win. He therefore raised a large standing army. Rather than constructing a new garrison town for soldiers, the oldest of the four cities of Delhi was emptied of its residents and soldiers garrisoned there. The residents of the old city were sent to the new capital of Daulatabad in the south. This whole decision of shifting the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad turned out to be one of his biggest mistakes. He had to come back to Delhi soon. It all increased the expenditure on administration and army. To meet the expense of maintaining such a large number of soldiers, the Sultan levied additional taxes. This coincided with famine in the area. Muhammad Tughlaq also paid his soldiers cash salaries. But instead of controlling prices, he used a token currency, somewhat like present day paper currency, but made out of cheap metals, not gold and silver. People in the 14th century did not trust these coins. They were very smart. They saved their gold and silver coins and paid all their taxes to the state with this token currency. This cheap currency could also be counterfeited or copied easily. Muhammad Tughlaq's administrative measures were a failure. His administrative measures created complications. The shifting of people to Daulatabad was resented. The raising of taxes and famine in the Ganga Yamuna belt led to widespread rebellion. The huge army was disbanded, and finally, the token currency had to be recalled. But we need to remember that despite all these failures, Muhammad bin Tughlaq is sometimes appreciated as the man of experiment. After the Tughlaqs, the Sayyid and Lodi dynasties ruled from Delhi and Agra until 1526. During the rule of later ruler of Delhi Sultanate, a lot of regions became independent, taking advantage of weak rulers. By then, Jaunpur, Bengal, Malwa, Rajasthan, and the entire South India had independent rulers who established flourishing states and prosperous capitals. This was also the period which saw the emergence of new ruling groups like the Afghans and Rajputs. Some of the states established in this period were small but powerful and extremely well administered. Sher Shah Suri started his career as the manager of a small territory and eventually challenged and defeated the Mughal Emperor Humayun. Before we end, let's quickly summarize the complete picture of Delhi Sultans.
Let's have a glimpse of slave dynasty. We'll start with the founder, Qutbuddin Aibak. He was an able general of Muhammad Ghori. From 1192 to 1206, Qutbuddin Aibak worked as the administrator or governor of Muhammad Ghori. But when Ghori died in 1206, Aibak declared himself as the ruler. His rule came to an end in 1210 while playing Chaugan. He died, and this game was similar to polo. Aibak was succeeded by Aram Shah. Aram Shah was soon assassinated by Iltutmish, who then ruled from 1211 to 1236. Being the ruler of a newly established empire, Iltutmish had the major challenge of ensuring political stability. For that, he organized Chalisa, a group of 40 nobles, which was like a team of most trusted officials. He also ensured to successfully deal with Mongol invasion. He protected the northwest region by placing Lahore and Multan under Delhi Sultanate. Iltutmish is also known in the Indian history for the establishment of Itta system, in which land was given to officials in lieu of their services. After Iltutmish came Razia Sultan. She was very efficient warrior and administrator. But being a woman, she had to face major resistance from nobles. Nobles never wanted to be ruled by a woman. A chronicler, Minhaj-us-Siraj, mentions that Razia was a great ruler but born of a wrong gender. Her rule came to an end when she was killed as a part of conspiracy by some nobles. After the death of Razia, the rulers like Muizzuddin Behram, Alauddin Masood and Nasiruddin Mahmud succeeded. But by this time, nobles had become very powerful, and thus came Ghiyasuddin Balban as the next ruler. He was a noble, and with his tricks and expertise, he became the king. As his rule was not acceptable to some group of nobles, Balban reduced the power of the nobility and heightened the position of the Sultan. He is popularly known for his policy of blood and iron and customs like Paibos and Sajda. After Balban, slave dynasty almost ended as his successors were too weak to continue for long. Now coming to the Khalji dynasty, Jalaluddin Khalji became the founder of this dynasty, who deposed the last sultan of the slave dynasty. He ruled from 1290 to 96. As some nobles of slave dynasty opposed him as the new king, Jalaluddin Khalji started sidelining the nobles who were serving in the Mamluk dynasty. The next ruler of Khalji dynasty was Alauddin Khalji. In the Indian history, he is known for his expansionist policy in South India. Malik Kafur and Khusro Khan were his efficient generals to take up these expeditions. But he was not very tolerant to non-Muslims, and thus he enforced taxes like jizya, kharaj, etc. Last but not the least, Alauddin Khalji is known as an efficient administrator. His economic reforms like fixed land revenue, fixed prices of goods in the market, regular inspection, etc. led to economic as well as political stability. After Alauddin Khalji, the successors were not very efficient, and soon the last Khalji ruler Khusro Khan was overthrown by Ghazi Malik. And this Ghazi Malik became the new Sultan of Delhi with the title of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, and thus began the Tughlaq dynasty. One of the most popular rulers of Tughlaq dynasty is Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He was the man of experiments but lacked farsightedness. For example, he spent too much time, effort and resources on distant campaigns. But the problem was he was not able to handle far-off territories. His attack on Khurasan and Iraq was also a failure. Muhammad bin Tughlaq became unpopular among his subjects as he increased taxes, especially on dhimmis. Dhimmis stands for non-Muslims, which led to massive revolts against him. His introduction of the token currency failed with the minting of fake currency to a large extent. People also felt disheartened with his rule when he shifted the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad in central India. Many people could not survive this long journey. Then from Daulatabad, it was also difficult to protect the northwest frontier. So Muhammad bin Tughlaq shifted the capital back to Delhi. Thus, all these events eventually made Muhammad bin Tughlaq an unpopular ruler among masses. The next ruler, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, is often known for his efforts to stabilize the food supply and reduce famines. For that, he built efficient canal systems. After Firoz Shah, there were many Tughlaq successors, but they started becoming politically insignificant. And then, we finally come to the last two dynasties, Sayyid dynasty and Lodi dynasty. We can see the list of rulers associated with these dynasties. By this time, political developments had become limited, and this phase of Indian history ended when the last ruler of Lodi dynasty, Ibrahim Lodi, was defeated by Babur, and Babur established the new empire, which is popularly known to us as the Mughal Empire.
So this is all about this chapter. I hope you like this. For more such academic videos, please subscribe to Constructing Minds.